China sends a chilling message to Taiwan. World militaries train for war against China. And crypto mining heads to America. That and more on this week's China News Headlines. Welcome to China Uncensored. I'm Chris Chappell. And this episode is sponsored by Surfshark. You should be using a VPN like Surfshark to protect yourself whenever you go online. So, the Chinese Communist Party continues to escalate its threats to Taiwan. This week, the People's Liberation Army released this propaganda video, featuring drills simulating a beach invasion. Note the aggressive music. Chinese troops load onto dozens of small boats and land on a beach. There's smoke grenades, drones, live fire, and explosions. It just so happens this video was released on Taiwan's National Day. Now, the video didn't specifically mention Taiwan, but I think we all know what it's trying to say. Especially since China then said all its training drills and incursions of Chinese jets into Taiwan's air defense identification zone are for defending Taiwan. Well, for defending Taiwan in terms of defending China's national sovereignty and integrity that Taiwan is definitely part of, according to the Communist Party, which is totally stupid. And I'm not even talking about the fact that Taiwan is an independent country and the only thing they need defending from is an invading Chinese army. No, I'm saying what's stupid is the idea that this training drill could ever be useful for defending Taiwan. It's not even good for invading Taiwan. Number one, the Taiwan Strait is about 100 miles long and it's rough waters. Number two, the northern part of Taiwan, where the capital is, doesn't have a lot of beaches. Most of it would be pretty hard to invade. The good beaches are mainly down here. But you'll notice right smack dab in the way is the Penghu Archipelago. And since Taiwan has a bunch of long-range missile launchers there, those PLA troops had better stop and take over that first before ever going to Taiwan. In other words, the whole beach landing drill took place in Fantasyland. Actually, the drills took place in Fujian province. And even though the video was released on Monday, you can tell the drill did not happen recently because of the blue skies. Fujian is currently being affected by a tropical storm passing between Taiwan and the Philippines. So, just another top-quality propaganda video from the Chinese regime. At least this one didn't involve singing children. Don't worry, I'm not going to play the song, because it's already playing in your head anyway. But Taiwan is getting pretty fed up with the Chinese military's harassment, and they're warning of a tougher response. The Taiwanese military said, in response to the intrusions by Chinese Communist military aircraft and ships into our air defense identification zone, we will adhere to the principle of the closer they get to the island, the stronger we will hit back. I'm not entirely sure what this means, though, since Taiwan hasn't hit back at all yet. So I don't know what hitting back stronger means in this case. Personally, I think Taiwan should hit back by withholding all bubble tea exports to China. Once China runs out of its strategic bubble tea reserves, the Chinese people will rise up and overthrow the Communist Party. And then Taiwan wins. And if you think this is an unrealistic scenario, you've never seen a line at a bubble tea shop in Asia. Hit the communists where they're weak, Taiwan. Back in September, my favorite Chinese state-run media, the Global Times, said China will eventually patrol over Taiwan. And if Taiwan fires, it would mean that the Chinese mainland will launch a destructive retaliation. Even a war to liberate the Taiwan island will start. In this context, the Taiwan military will never dare to fire at a PLA aircraft on such a mission. Again, this could all be avoided with a strategic bubble tea embargo. But there is some bittersweet news for the Chinese regime. Harvard University is moving one of its popular Chinese language programs from Beijing to Taiwan. I say bittersweet news because this now means Yale will have to support China all by itself. What's that, Shelley? Yale has a language program in Taiwan as well? The Chinese Communist Party has even managed to bridge the Yale-Harvard divide. Now the real question is, Pinyin or Bopomofo? And after the break, Bitcoin is going to America. Welcome back. This week saw the second phase of the QUAD military drills. The QUAD is an alliance between the US, India, Australia, and Japan aimed at countering China. The second phase of military training, of course, comes after the announcement of AUKUS, a similar alliance between the US, UK, and Australia, which is also aimed at countering China. That deal is likely one reason that the military exercise is now focusing so heavily on interoperability, as Australia, the UK, and the United States will effectively be using different models of the same torpedo and submarine technology. And a big part of AUKUS was the US giving Australia nuclear-powered submarine technology. All of this with an eye on dealing with a possible Chinese invasion of Taiwan. So the cracking down on Taiwan threat really isn't working out so well for the Chinese regime. And speaking of Chinese crackdowns backfiring, after China recently banned crypto mining and trading, the US has taken the lead as the biggest Bitcoin mining hub. That means more crypto mining happens in the US than anywhere in the world. In August of last year, the US was responsible for just 4.2% of the world's Bitcoin mining activity. It's now over 35%. Of course, since crypto mining has been criticized for its environmental impact, since it requires so much energy, maybe it's only a matter of time before the Biden administration bans it as well. And speaking of the environment, the wife of Biden's climate envoy, John Kerry, her name is Teresa Heinz, has over $1 million worth of investments in a hedge fund with ties to China. Now, as we've talked about in a recent episode, Wall Street essentially forces Americans to invest in China without realizing it. But that's not what's going on here. Heinz has the investments in Tungyue Partners, a New York hedge fund that specifically focuses on equity investments in China. Now, this investment is through the Heinz Family Trust Fund. Yes, the ketchup Heinz. And as the Daily Caller points out, the Heinz family is also connected to President Joe Biden's son, Hunter Biden, and his business dealings with Chinese companies. Kerry's stepson, Christopher Heinz, co-founded the firm Rosemont Seneca Partners with Hunter Biden in 2009, which itself doesn't mean there's any wrongdoing in the Heinz family's China investments. But it does show how Chinese money can taint or give the perception of taint to influential U.S. elites, especially since Teresa Heinz's husband, John Kerry, is a key U.S. negotiator with the Chinese Communist Party. And speaking of Chinese money, Morgan Stanley is calling China's real estate market attractive. This is despite a whole slew of Chinese developers warning they might default. Kind of like how BlackRock continues to recommend people triple their investments in China. At this point, Dogecoin is a more stable investment. And at least that's probably now mined in the USA. A Pentagon official says he resigned because US cybersecurity is no match for China. According to his LinkedIn post about quitting, he said it was because the Pentagon wasn't making cybersecurity and AI a priority. And in an interview with the Financial Times, he said, "We have no competing fighting chance against China in 15 to 20 years. Right now, it's already a done deal. It is already over, in my opinion." However, he's now saying the Financial Times completely mischaracterized his statements and denies saying America has lost its AI fight to China. In yet another LinkedIn post, he wrote, "I want to clarify one thing. I never said we lost. I said as it stands, and if we don't wake up now, we have no fighting chance to win against China in 15 years. Yeah, kind of an important difference. But either way, he's not staying on to help. And speaking of LinkedIn, Microsoft is shutting down LinkedIn in China. Microsoft says it's because having to comply with the Chinese state has become increasingly challenging. Really, you don't say. Microsoft's decision comes after they got in trouble for censoring the profiles of LinkedIn users in its China version, including users who were outside China. like Chinese pro-democracy activist and Tiananmen survivor Zhou Fengsuo, and human rights activist Peter Humphrey, who was imprisoned in China. But even after all that censorship, LinkedIn then got in trouble with the Chinese regime for not censoring enough. And then LinkedIn got in trouble again, this time for censoring US journalists' profiles. But if you think all this trouble is convincing Microsoft to quit the China market, don't worry, because Microsoft is starting a brand new job search website that's just for China. It's called InJobs. But don't worry, they've learned their lesson. InJobs will not include a social feed or the ability to share posts or articles. Censorship problem solved. The International Olympic Committee. It calls itself the guardian of the Olympics and vows to build a peaceful and better world through sport. And it will do that by not caring about human rights. A senior member of the IOC was asked about all the genocide in China, and he said, "We're not a world government. We have to respect the sovereignty of the countries who are hosting the games." So, to build a better world through sport, they ignore that their chosen host country is committing genocide and might not allow people from outside China to attend. I'm glad the IOC is in charge of the Olympics. And this episode is sponsored by Surfshark. When you go online, you should be using a VPN to protect yourself. Like if you want to search the web for info about Rosemont Seneca's secret China investments. The people at Surfshark care about your privacy and security. That's why they put in place uncrackable encryption and the most secure VPN protocols. Surfshark's IP and DNS leak protection means nobody can find where you're really connecting from. Plus, Surfshark doesn't keep logs of what you do. Because if you're looking into America's elites and their business relationships in China, you really don't want the government or your internet service provider knowing where you are or what you're doing online. So use Surfshark. And with one account, you can use Surfshark across as many devices as you want. Try it out with our special deal that includes 83% off a 2-year plan plus 3 extra months for free. Go to surfshark.com/uncensored and use the code UNCENSORED to get their special deal that includes 3 extra months for free. Use the link in the description below. Once again, I'm Chris Chappell. Thanks for watching China Uncensored.